The Consecrated Keris might be one of the strongest weapons in RuneScape, but is it actually worth using anywhere? Well, today we're going to discuss that and figure it out. Over the past few days, I have been doing a lot of questing in order to actually get this item unlocked. I'm not much of a quester. I don't have the quest cape. And if we hover over the tooltip, you can see that this is a tier 80 weapon with a plus 33% damage modifier. To put this in perspective, a upgraded T-Maul is a tier 80 weapon with plus 17.5% damage, and I believe that is classed around a tier 104 equivalent. Now, T-Maul doesn't get the same benefit from accuracy, it gets more damage and accuracy, and this is the same with the Keris. Keris is a plus 15% hit chance on a tier 80. However, if you wear the Desert Amulet, you get an additional 10% accuracy, and the really odd thing with this Keris is there is a 2% base chance to increase the damage plus 200%, which is absolutely bananas. And when you wear Desert Ammy 3 or above, that goes up to 3.3%. Now, as far as I can tell, there are no additional benefits for getting Desert Amulet 4, so hopefully that'll save some of y'all some questing and doing task sets and whatnot. But honestly, the figures alone are pretty astronomical. The Dragon Main weapons, which obviously only work on dragon targets, they're a tier 80 weapon with a plus 25% damage buff, and they don't even have an accuracy buff, and they are still considered very strong for the targets that they do work on. You might be thinking, okay, case settled, this is the strongest weapon in game, everyone should go get one. However, if I bring over the wiki page for this Keris, as you can see, the effect only works on scarab creatures, so the new Slayer mobs and some of the other stuff, some older content in game, some stuff from the Corrupt Slayer dungeon, and Caliphites. So this is a very limited use weapon, but where it does work, it is extremely strong. Now, the original Keris did not work on Sanctum of Rebirth. However, this one gets the Followers of a Masket, so technically this works in Sanctum of Rebirth. Now, I went through and tested this in a couple different ways. I tested this in a melee camp situation, and I tested this in a hybrid setup, and I'll overlay some footage here for you to watch on. And while what I found is, yes, this is the strongest weapon to exist that works at Sanctum of Rebirth, you still have to use melee there, which with how the dungeon is designed is not exactly the most melee friendly. The first two bosses aren't too bad with melee. You can position yourself pretty well. The one that is very much not melee friendly is Nakatra. While yes, you are forced away and you can keep a damage rotation on Nakatra while using melee if you're being mindful of where you're diving to, the constant in and out yo-yo effect, it makes doing the boss with melee not exactly friendly. And on phase 4, since you're zerked, and also investments, which essentially is just paper mache armor, if you make one positional mistake on phase 4, you are guaranteed dead. And while you could survive a hit with something like Vitpot, it is not exactly ideal to be using this combat style at Nakatra. Now, I have done some melee camp kills, and the kill times were interesting. I think I was able to get like a mid 130s with melee camp on the first boss, and Kezalam I could see going into the sub 2 territory, but range camp is already doing low ones, and I believe mage camp is also in the mid to low ones. I'm sure some absolute giga chad out there could come up with a comparable rotation using this, and there's probably something I'm missing rotation wise. I was mostly focusing on using a Grim and a Calg demon. However, maybe something with full scripture and a Ripper demon doing a more consistent damage rotation would be more ideal. I didn't really test that. I'm not so much into this new age melee camp stuff, but the very interesting thing about this Keris when it comes to Sanctum of Rebirth is that without the Desert Amulet accuracy buff, it does not need a Zerk aura to maintain accuracy. Now, if you want to use something like Dragon Battle Axe, you will have to bring something like a stat hammer in order to bring the accuracy up, or just use the cleave ability. And Dragon Battle Axe is very strong, so you could do something like that, or you could bring the Desert Amulet and go that route. But what this brings into consideration is something of a hybrid setup where you can have the Zerk aura going for magic or range and just have a melee swap to fill in the gaps. Now, I am not super well versed in the range camp or magic camp methods. I believe the high-end range camp does 9 kill per hour, and I'm I don't believe there is really any room to add in a melee bridge swap. Maybe with the Magicamp one, I believe it's quoted at 8 kills per hour, at least in PvME. I'm sure actual results are probably less than this. As that magic rotation, when I looked over it, it was rather RNG based on the last phase, so maybe a melee swap could make the one cycle much more consistent for Magic, at least if Magic's trying to use Metamorph on the last phase. And that's kind of what I've been exploring with here. This is the preset I tossed together and did about 3 hours of testing on stream, and it definitely needs significant optimization in order for me to actually come up with a method that is comparable. I still need to learn the Sanctum methods, but I've been putting it off because they do take a while. But then that leads into the question of, should you actually get this Keris? And I believe it is worthwhile if you still have to do the KK or KQ logs, or for some reason you enjoy those bosses. If you want to have a hybrid swap, or for some reason you really want a melee camp Sanctum of Rebirth, I enjoy it as a challenge, but I don't see it being a very consistent farming method. Although I'm sure someone is going to come up with a method soon. One of the melee camps out there will probably come up with something and prove me wrong on that, but only time will tell on that. The main thing that I think this Keris might be useful for is the new Amasket boss that is coming up. I believe it will be in summer of 2025 this content will drop, and hopefully that boss is a little bit more melee friendly, and if that is the case, then Keris will absolutely be used. Also, if you're doing Slayer task and you get the new Scarabs creatures, I forget the names of them, but this Keris will definitely do work on those. So essentially, if you want to play with the Keris and you like coming up with your own creative rotations based on either hybrid or some type of style camp with melee, go ahead and get it. It's definitely worthwhile. If you just want something nice and you're on kind of a limited build, this can definitely be a source of damage for any of the bosses you're doing. Or if you just want to do melee on those Slayer creatures, the new Scarab ones, there's the elite ones where you have to kill them to upgrade to the Consecrated Keris from the primed one. That would be a good source as well. I'm personally 200 mil Slayer, so I don't do the tasks anymore, but I don't regret doing the quests and getting it because it does allow me to experiment at Sanctum of Rebirth with using melee, which is probably my favorite combat style. I'd say Mage Melee Hybrid's probably my favorite combo, or my favorite combat method in the entire game. Mage Melee has such a synergy to it. It flows very nicely, especially with Nami being buffed by Insight Fear, and it just absolutely flows. Definitely my favorite. If you haven't tried any sort of Mage Melee Hybrid on Best in Slot gear, I would definitely recommend it. But before I ramble on for another 20 minutes, if you have any questions about the Keris, leave them in the comments below and I should be able to reply to them. But I believe I have rambled on long enough, so I'm going to call the video here. Thank you very much for watching. Your viewership is greatly appreciated. Have a wonderful morning, evening, afternoon, nighttime, whatever it is, wherever you are, and I'll see you all next time for the next video. Peace.